with Mr. Jared Knott on Saturday, March 25th, 2023 at 4:05 p.m. Eastern time. Guys, if you want to support the show, click on the little red button for locals. You can go give me a couple bucks a month, get exclusive content, help keep the podcast independent, all that good stuff. But today we're going to discuss your book, Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters. And the link is in the description. And dude, that's a genuinely good book. I seriously mean that. That is a genuinely good book about it. Actually, in a weird way, was kind of optimistic in that when it feels like the world can be going in like such a dark direction at times, that book really laid out that any one little factor could change
Yeah.
and like the entire timeline can change. So, and you can't control every factor. It really is the butterfly effect. And so it's like almost chaos, like chaos theory. Like one little thing can change and like we don't have to go to World War III. We don't have to do this. Now, one thing can change and it can turn into the apocalypse. That's the flip side of the coin. But yeah, man. Real quick, could you introduce yourself to the new listeners?
Yes, yes. I'm Jared Knott. Okay, and I have I'm happy to say a best-selling book. It's been blessed. It's been on the bestseller list now for over 27 months, won 6 awards, and it's sold well over 20,000 copies. The audiobook is also doing very well. We've had a tremendous response. I got one of my favorite reviews on the book came recently from this lady. She said she had a friend who was being incarcerated or was incarcerated, and so she wanted to have something to read, so she sent him a copy of the book, and he enjoyed it very, very much. He passed it around to all the fellow inmates, and they really liked it. They thought it was a very interesting book, which is nice to know. We got a special audience and kind of a special circumstance. They're guests of the state, and they may have a special interest in a book talking about tiny blunders leading to big disasters. They
That's
may
a
be
good
living
point.
the experience. So anyway, but I get a lot of feedback. We have like almost not quite 2,500 reviews, vast majority of which I'm happy to say have been very, very positive. And I feel kind of a connection with my readers. It's a fun book to read and an interesting book to read. I find writing about it, I find talking about it. I feel it makes me feel warm in my heart when I hear good feedback from the listeners, which I'm happy to say it's come in large abundance. So I feel very, very blessed.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it just makes me think about like current events. Like
Mhm.
any one little thing, the Chinese spy balloon, Nord Stream. Well, that's not really tiny, but any one thing, it's I guess what makes me a little wary about like, the war, us backing Ukraine and China now backing Russia. It's like this might be something that we look at in 50 years and go, yeah, it started so small and then took over everything.
Yes, I had an article, I have to say, just published in American Greatness magazine. And in that article, I talk about how the war with China has already begun. Okay, and we're losing that war. Of course, we think of wars as being amphibious landings and bombing runs and the evening news showing casualties on the battlefield. But this war, the casualties are coming primarily from fentanyl being manufactured in China, the precursors sent to the drug cartels. Now, some of it comes directly from China to the United States, but a large amount of it going into the drug cartels in Mexico that make it into pills, come across our open border and killing 72,000 of our young people every year from drug overdoses. That's just the fentanyl. There's also imports coming in of methamphetamine and also heroin and other drugs, cocaine. And it's also causing even more casualties because the total casualty list people killed is like 110,000 a year, 72,000 of which is fentanyl. Anyway, that is, and you look at the last 3 years, we don't know the exact number, but easily 180, 190, maybe 200,000 people killed from drug overdoses in the last 3 years in the United States. The casualties of our wars from the Korean War to the present, including Vietnam, including the global war on terrorism, all that together, maybe 85,000 have been killed. So something like double the number of people killed in our shooting wars have been killed from the drug crisis, greatly encouraged and greatly accelerated by the Chinese Communist Party. Why? And they're doing it not to make money. They're selling the drugs and the precursors at a very, very cheap price to get as many people as possible addicted to using those drugs to tear at the fabric of our society and to weaken the country. They don't allow anything like that to take place in their own country, but they're greatly encouraging to take place in the United States, or adding as much fuel to the fire as they possibly can. That's just one of many ways in which they're trying to attack the United States. Of course, the TikTok situation is another. They're trying to degrade and to damage our young people in particular, and to make America weaker. And they're trying to be the dominant power in the world at the expense of freedom and elections and democracy, and at the expense primarily of the United States. That's the situation we face.
Yeah. Do you think the U.S. is going to effectively fight back against this new form of warfare that's not, tanks and fighter jets, but rather economic, or like you just said, drug-based, or, culturally based?
We're trying to be optimistic, and sometimes it's difficult to be optimistic with all the bad news was heaped on us here. But we'll say, whenever the American people and the United States government finally gets focused and finally starts making a major effort, whenever that's happened, they've been able to accomplish great things. World War II being one of the top examples. We were way behind in 1939 in terms of our armament, and planes, tanks, etc., and Navy. And of course, after December the 7th, we were way, way, way behind, and things looking very bad for us. But it was a huge response in the United States, its people, and the war production just exploded with a great fury. We were able to produce a mountain of tanks, well-designed planes, tanks, another story, but and weapons and so on like that. And we're able to, some people say we just overwhelmed the enemy by our kind of rich man solution, overwhelmed them, but okay, we'll take it, and won in that way. So they would never have guessed to such a huge increase in production for America could happen in such a short period of time, but it did. So whenever we faced a great challenge and we recognize the challenge and the public becomes aware of the challenge, we can do almost anything. Now, of course, that's a nice little speech, excuse me, but hope to gosh, we can gear up again and handle this challenge. I'm somewhat optimistic because we've done it so often in the past.
Yeah. Do you think we are stumbling into World War III?
I want to say surely not, but at the same time, we have a very dangerous enemy that has a larger Navy than we have. A whole list of things they're doing to attack the United States, to threaten the Panama Canal, to build up their relations with Argentina and other nations, of course, in fact, also with Russia. And I want to say, surely we can somehow avoid this, but there's a serious chance we get into a war over Taiwan. It could get real ugly. It could escalate, but I would want to say World War III. Surely not, although we are living in dangerous times.
When do you think China's going to move on Taiwan?
My premise is that if we build up our Navy and build up our resources, and with the support of New Zealand and Australia, Japan, South Korea, indirectly NATO, if we build up our forces so they're strong enough, and the people of Taiwan, I might mention, especially if we win in Ukraine and defeat the Russian army soundly, that's going to be an encouragement to the people of Taiwan to do the same thing that the Ukrainians did. And if China sees this, determined, well-supported, well-weaponized people in Taiwan willing to fight to the death, literally to defend their nation, they may look for peaceful alternatives rather than conquering Taiwan. And I don't know how much they're going to gain from Taiwan. Conquering Taiwan, they're going to pay a heavy price in terms of business and influence around the world. But I think if we stand up to them, we have a good chance of having a good outcome.
It kind of feels like China's just like watching us deplete our stockpiles in Ukraine and just waiting to pounce.
Yes, that's, I'm sure, the chess game and the analysis that they're making, they're thinking along exactly right along those very lines. All the tanks and all the planes and all the support being sent to the Ukrainians depletes what we have available for other defenses and other pursuits. It's going to be primarily built up of our Navy in the Pacific. And it does seem like that the United States is the one that's shouldered with the biggest burden. France, Germany, Australia, they do a little bit to do it to some extent, but the burden falls on the United States over and over again. We could sure use as much help as possible from our allies.
Hmm. Alternatively, could it be that China's watching the fight in Ukraine and seeing how many nations are, regardless of what people think, if we should or shouldn't, just objectively, how many nations have come to the aid of Ukraine? Are they maybe looking at that and going, oh, it's not all talk, like they will actually come defend, and thus are they going to also do that in Taiwan?
Yes, now I guess Ron DeSantis has kind of come out and implied that there's a limit to what we can do in Ukraine. That's primarily a regional conflict, is what his position was. Well, I respectfully disagree. Mark Levine and General Jack Keane and Nikki Haley, among others, think that it's very important that we win in the Ukraine, because a win there is going to be a win for the Taiwan as well. If we through determination and technology and more advanced weaponry, if we're able to defeat the Russians. And by the way, on that subject, those people understand one thing. Mr. Putin understands one thing, and that's power, strength. If he's beaten solidly, that's the only thing that's going to work there. If we try to get him to sign a peace agreement, a truce of some kind, of course, they're notorious for violating almost every truce, every agreement they ever made. It means nothing to them. He's, of course, a mass murderer who lies just as often as he takes a drink of water. So the only thing that's going to work there, I think, is a solid defeat of the Russians, which is going to help us tremendously in Taiwan. And we're going to have to find the resources, to invest the resources to maintain a strong Navy and a strong presence in the Pacific. What's going to work here with China is if they see not an easy way to victory, they see a strong, determined opponent, that's our best chance for a peaceful resolution in the Pacific.
Do you think it's possible to win in Ukraine?
Uh,
Kind of seems like a
yes,
meat grinder.
it's a meat grinder. Now the Russian army has performed very poorly. It's just surprised everybody how poor their performance is. They do have those hypersonic missiles. They do have a good tank, but the logistics have been horrible, and also the training of the troops has been horrible, and their willingness to fight has been very weak. They've just been done very, very poorly. There's really going to be an offensive in April, they think, on the part of the Ukrainians. If it is successful, we can win in Ukraine, which I think we can. That's going to be our best foundation to stand on to try to solve the situation in Taiwan.
But if China starts supplying Russia, and then the United States and NATO are supplying Ukraine, I mean, who's going to blink first? This is looking like it could just grind on for the foreseeable future.
It may have to be decided on the battlefield. Now, of course, we need to be doing, there are people that have a trillion times more about it than I do, but every pressure should be applied to China that they not supply the Russians with arms. So far, there's not been any evidence of any substantial direct aid, but the Russians are running out of supplies and equipment and weaponry themselves. And so they'd be hard pressed to continue to work successfully unless they get a lot of weapons from China. Again, of course, I'm sure we are doing everything we can to discourage that from happening. And I think though, the Ukrainians are very determined to win, very motivated. And by the way, they say learning how to operate the new weapon systems very, very successfully. And it's accelerated the timetable because they have been doing so well, learning how to operate the tanks and the artillery, and as well as the jets, the warplanes. So that's an encouraging sign. They are determined to win if we give them the proper support. I think they can beat the Russians, Russian troops there on the ground don't even want to be there, don't even know why they're there.
Yeah. I think China's already started, though. I want to say I saw last night that they've started supplying Russia with drones. So I don't think it's even hypothetical anymore.
I know they're getting a lot of drones, of course, from Iran. I've not heard that about the Chinese, but that could very well be that. How far they're willing to go? Are they willing to send tanks? Are they willing to send warplanes? Are they willing to send advisors? I don't know, but that's a very serious. That's kind of their Russia's one chance, possibly of trying to dig their way out of this hole, is support from the Chinese. So hopefully that'll happen, but I don't know what's exactly what's going to happen.
To go back to, I guess, the theme of your book, and it's a bit pessimistic, but what ways could this just accidentally escalate?
Well, there's a book, a very well written book called This Close, and it was about how we nearly got into a nuclear war in the early 1960s. It was, of course, the confrontation over the missiles in Cuba by the Russians, okay, which would threaten the United States. They had interarranged ballistic missiles that were being put into Cuba. The big confrontation with President Kennedy against Khrushchev. They must be withdrawn. They cannot be allowed to stay there. Well, there was a Russian submarines that had come down into the waters that are close to Cuba, and it was the waters were very warm there, and the sailors on down the submarines were in 120-degree temperatures. Okay, and there was American ships above the submarines harassing them, dropping hand grenades into the water. Well, the hand grenades didn't do any direct damage, but it was like taking a great big sledgehammer and hitting against the side of the submarine. Boom, boom, here we are, 120 degrees. Here we got these big explosions just rocking their submarine, and the submarine captain, Russian captain, was very close to firing a missile to blow up the ship above him. Okay, and it's just thinking, 120 degrees here, he's getting irritated here, they're provoking him, and he was about to push the button. Fortunately, discovered in the book, there was another Soviet captain on board who had gone through a nuclear accident that the Russians had just experienced, and he talked the captain out of doing that. Well, oh my gosh, if he had fired a missile that would destroy the American ship above it that's harassing him, oh my gosh, well, I don't know what would have happened. Would that have triggered a chain reaction, and not just one ship lost, but a major incident that could have triggered a nuclear war. And also paralleling that, John Kennedy, by the way, comes out looking very good in that particular book. John Kennedy was talking about he's getting a lot of crap advice from the group of wise old men he assembled and the other military leaders. The vast majority of them were supporting military action with Cuba. And he said John Kennedy did not like Adlai Stevenson. I don't know why he didn't, but it said in the book he didn't. And who was our ambassador to the United Nations at the time. But he did ask his opinion, his input. And he was just about the only advisor who said, let's find a peaceful solution. Let's see if we can't find a peaceful solution. He followed his advice, and negotiating back and forth, communicating back and forth, they were able to reach a kind of a compromise. Military action was avoided. By the way, Curtis LeMay, the charge of the Air Force there, was very much in favor of going in and bombing Cuba. It would have been, who knows what would happen, but it was a tough, it's probably the most dangerous time in terms of nuclear war in the history of the country. Well, hopefully we don't get to that situation where just one captain pushing one button and start a war that could multiply into a nuclear war. It was a close call. And again, the name of the book is This Close, and I forget the exact name of the author, but it's an excellent book there. John Kennedy deserves very high marks for how he handled that situation. Did not deserve high marks for the Bay of Pigs fiasco, but deserves great appreciation for the way he handled that particular crisis. So bringing that forward, pray to gosh, we never get ourselves in that kind of situation. Hopefully there are rational minds, however evil they might be. Hopefully we have rational minds on the other side who want to avoid that kind of tinderbox situation, which could lead to big nuclear war.
Yeah, my fear is that this just turns into a war of attrition, and Putin finally just launches like a tactical nuke. That's like my fear, is he's back up against the wall, and then he's like, what do I care?
Mhm. Well, he is rumored to have cancer, maybe dying of cancer. Maybe it's not true. Maybe he doesn't have cancer at all. Maybe it's an admission or whatever. I don't know. But the big weakness to the Soviet system and even the Chinese system is that so much power, almost all power, is invested in just one personality. Okay, there was a talk that maybe Mr. Putin had mismanaged the war so badly that Syria, the oligarchs and the military leaders would get together. He would be ousted the way Khrushchev was ousted back in the early 60s. Just relegated off to almost like a house arrest kind of situation. Well, Mr. Putin, of course, paranoid and manipulative, has solved that problem with his death squads. He's gone around and had a large number of the oligarchs murdered. And there's a word, kind of a comical, dark comedy kind of word called defenestration. And what is that? That means throwing somebody out of a window.
Yeah.
Well, they've had 2 or 3 cases of someone in the hospital being committing suicide by jumping out a window from 6-story height. Well, yeah. And also people who supposedly committed suicide, and also people who were shot by unknown assailants, about 8, 10, 12 of them. It just so there was one oligarch who was had moved to an expensive apartment building in Washington, D.C. And you'd want to say, well, gee, the White House is just down the road. FBI is just a few blocks away. Surely they would not murder him right there. So right in Washington, D.C. I guess they did. He was the method, whether it was defenestration or fake suicide or whatever, right there, our nation's capital. And it's 10, 12 of them just one after the other. What do you think? Mr. 4 days later, he was murdered also. So he's covered himself in terms of any kind of palace coup by murdering all the people that possibly be part of the palace coup, which, by the way, is very 30. So to digress a second, the person in history who's responsible for the most number of deaths, highest body count, is Mao Zedong. Okay, and the second is Stalin. Both of those people murdered awful large numbers of their own people, and then Hitler only comes in third. But getting back to the war in Ukraine, the only way I think it's going to successfully end is if the Russian army is just solidly beaten. Okay, this is totally defeated on the battlefield, and we need to give them, in my humble opinion, everything that we can in terms of warplanes, in terms of tanks, in terms of HIMARS going in a direction down toward the telephone has not rung. The White House has not called to ask my advice, but there it is, free of charge.
They haven't called yet.
No.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that was the second best hope, was that there would be some sort of palace coup, as you said. But it seems like he's kind of crossing all those,
Yeah.
knocking those threats out. Yeah, I think that, I mean, do you think we're going to see NATO troops there? Do you think we're going to see U.S. troops? Do you think it's going to escalate?
I don't think so. One of the biggest things on the positive side is that the Ukrainians are fighting so well, learning the new system so rapidly and so well, and they are the ones winning the war with our help. And it's an expensive process, all those tanks, all those planes, all those anti-missile systems, et cetera, like that. But that is our biggest thing in our favor. We have a very successful, determined fighting force with the Ukrainians. God bless them for that. And it's not going to be necessary that NATO troops or American troops go in there except as advisors back behind the lines. So I don't see American troops go in there. I don't think it's going to be, hopefully not going to be necessary. Of course, you can turn the other way. Chinese weapons come in that bolsters the Russian Chinese troops go in there. and maybe they can mount a horrible grind. And of course, Mr. Putin didn't care how many troops are lost or how many weapons are destroyed. He just keeps on pouring them into the meat. So it could help break.
Yeah, it's no bueno. That's not good. I mean, yeah, I don't know, unless something absurd happens. Like, didn't we just like drone something in Iran or Syria like 2 days ago?
Uh, yes, that's it's just what I see there on the news is that yes, I think it's ISIS or certain terrorist fighters from Iran have been attacking the United States, and they were asking why our anti-missile, anti-drone system was not effective. It may have been that it was just had back up to protect our contractors and our military personnel. I think we have 900 people in Syria, protect them from drone attacks, and as well as counterattacking the attacks that take place. Now, it's much better if we can just neutralize the attack with, as opposed to getting hit and losing people and then having to hit back and so on like that. But that's, I'm just repeating what I've seen on the news. You know, they say that the Iranians and the Syrians are not allies, but they're unite whenever it's anti-American. So if they see a chance to attack the United States, the Iranians participated in that attack, I think.
Yeah, I don't know why. I just have like a creeping feeling that something's gonna accidentally happen. Like someone's gonna fire something into some, it's gonna suck in like a second country or a third country. And it's just gonna spiral very, very quickly. And we got through the Cold War, but I mean, all the nukes are still there. Like all the threats are still there. It ended, but nothing actually went away. Like that's something that I think a lot of us forget is like all the missile silos are still there. All the warheads are still primed. Like the nuclear subs are still on patrol. None of it went away. Like, yeah, we got through it, but it's ongoing. And at any moment this could, I mean, with banks collapsing, it's at any moment, it's just like there's so much just like dry wood. Like one spark could just burn this thing. Like, I mean, like Reveal Princip, if it wasn't him, I think it would have been anybody. I think that whole area, or at least from what I remember from history, is like that was the powder keg, right? So if it wasn't Princip, it would have been someone doing something.
Well, yeah, there's a great quote attributed to von Bismarck. And of course, sometimes these people get creative and they make up quotes that were never stated. But he was supposedly said, "I can tell you about the war starting, and I can't tell you when, but I can tell you where. Some fool thing in the Balkans will be what starts it. The leaders of Europe are like men smoking a cigar in an armory. One spark will set it all off. Words to that effect." And that ended up being the case. They had the alliances and kind of balanced out against each other. England on one side, France on one side. They had Austrians and the Russians on the other side. The Russians, or the Germans, I should say, of course, the Russians are also on the Allied side, but the Russians, the Germans were looking to start the war. There was a thing, but an accident and set it all off. Well, yes and no. That the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, which was in the book, like as an accident, the chauffeur takes the wrong turn, and then coming out of Schiller's Delicatessen. Now the story was that he stepped out with his lunch in his hand, some kind of meat pastry. I think that turns out not to be true, but he steps out, and here, pulled right in front of him, is the Archduke Ferdinand and his princess, his wife, and there's a precept with his pistol, and he pulls out and bam, bam, bam. He shot the wife. He said he was aiming for this general on the other side of the running board, and he missed him and hits the rifle. Okay. Anyway, of course, then that one domino after another. The Germans kind of looking for an excuse to start the war anyway, and here we go. And it was if it had not been for that single mistake, I guess the Germans were looking for an opportunity to start the war. Would have eventually started it, but of course, you never know. Ferdinand himself was a moderate voice. It's ironic that the Black Hand organization was targeting him because he was a more moderating voice. If his father had retired or died and he had taken over, that he would have been pulling in the direction of peace and avoiding war. And it's possible that World War I might have been avoided altogether. But of course, you just don't know. But again, the Germans were spoiling for a fight. And so you can't say that the war would not have taken place without that mistake. But it's possible that it would not have taken place. And then two, if they had waited another year or two when they were more prepared, maybe they would have won it when it finally did start. So it's when it was great unknowns, it was triggered by a tiny mistake, as I talked about in the book. But it would have come anyway. Would they have won? If they waited a year or two, of course, no one knows the answer to those questions.
Yeah, I think Dan Carlin said in his I think it's a 6-part series on World War I, Blueprints for Armageddon, like 4 hours each. It's like it's a set of podcasts, but it's better than like any audiobook I've ever listened to. And it's just his take on World War I. And I think he describes it as like there are all these interlocking mechanisms and alliances and kind of NATO-esque. If the attack on one is an attack on all. And it was like World War I he was like, it started as just this like Rube Goldberg machine. Like everything was just, no one wanted to like default on their alliance. So just, you have to go here and we're going to go there. So we're going to start putting trains of soldiers here. And it was just, the thing just started. And it was like, the only way out of this is through it.
Well, yeah, I know. Now there was a movie, a television movie about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Jack Devane, who's now been selling gold, of course, with Rosalind Capital for a number of years now, he played John Kennedy. And in the transcript there in the movie, he says that he read the book, The Guns of August.
Yeah.
And that there was asked such and such a general, how did the World War?
How did it all begin? Oh, if only we knew.
If we only knew. Well, I read that book too. It's one of my favorite books. And I didn't get that message in there at all. The message I got, and people have a tendency to blame the Allies as equally with the Germans and the Austrians. Well, that's not the message I got at all. The message that I got from the book, The Guns of August, very clearly was a German aggression. And they very much wanted to start a war. Now, the French, by the way, they had the two lines facing each other. The war had not yet started. The French gave the order for their military forces to pull back 10 miles from the line, 10 miles, and the local commanders are just furious. We're dug in, we're in strong protective positions, we're giving up strong defensive positions. The order to pull back from the front lines by 10 miles, they pull all the way back 10 miles. Why is that? So that there could not be a single incident that accidentally triggers the beginning of World War I. Well, okay, that's the French position. Of course, they're lovers more than fighters. God bless them for that. But they were bending over backwards to avoid a conflict. Okay, and it's the Germans who looking for a conflict, looking for an excuse to start the war. Of course, they didn't. And here comes the attack. There's a whole story about it there about how they. Oh, yes, that's a whole other story going into it. But they almost won, and there was a Harvard professor who wrote this essay or report saying it would have been better if the Germans had have won World War I. What are we talking about? He said, well, then World War II would not have been necessary, and Holocaust would not have been necessary, and the world would have been better off. Just get over with, let the Germans win, and go on from there. And of course, the Kaiser was not nearly as evil as Adolf Hitler. There was the whole business about tracking down the Jews and the gas houses and all terrible things would not have happened. Well, I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. I push you. I'll say it on another subject kind of an aside there that the American troops fought very well there. That was, and it could be that we had a lot of boys from the farm who did a lot of hunting and had a familiar with riflery. Of course, the most famous of whom was, of course, Sergeant York. Okay, I almost want to say Gary Cooper, but it was Sergeant York, who was an incredible marksman, and of course was one of the biggest American heroes of all time. But he was, of course, leading example of the fine performance of the American soldiers. And here's something else too. So some sort of say that in fact, von Bismarck at the end of World War I said that the war was won. The war was won by the American infantry in the Ardennes. Okay. Now, of course, as the old, bless you there, as the old saying, very true. Victory has 1,000 fathers, and failure has an orphan. Well, okay, World War I's over. The Allies have won. Who gets the credit? Well, the British. Well, we deserve a lot of credit. French, we deserve a lot of credit. The Russians have some credit, and the United States, which came to the war late, well, maybe not so much. But the evidence would indicate again, von Bismarck, not Bismarck, von Hindenburg. The war was won by the American infantry in the Ardennes, and General Pershing may have been a critical factor. He did an excellent general, he did an excellent job in organizing and focusing our forces and in training the American infantry primarily at that point. One thing they were doing is they would do a just-in-time kind of thing with the artillery. It'd be heavy artillery falling on the German lines, flying on the German lines. I'd stop for 15 minutes, start up again 13, 14, 15 minutes later. I would go stop, start, stop, start. And then at this designated time at 6:53 in the evening, American forces creeping up, okay, and at exactly 6:53, it stops. There they are, jumping into the trenches, getting a big jump on the Germans. Well, there are things like that that they trained the American troops to do, and it was very effective. And in late October, November, the American offensive was extremely effective, and the German lines were collapsing. Just as a month earlier, 6 weeks earlier, General Haig, the British general, was not a very good general, I'll explain in a second, was calling for a truce, talking for an armistice that was not much more than just a neutral truce. He was kind of almost caving in. But the great success of the American troops, for sounding chauvinistic, won the war fairly decisively. Okay, now, General Pershing was saying, we need to keep driving forward and defeat them and get an unconditional surrender. If we do not, they would just lick their wounds and come back at us again. And so, but he was then told to kind of, that's none of your business. You're running the military. This is a diplomatic decision from the president and from the diplomats, so stay out of it. And so he was kind of nipped and kind of backed away. And it was the diplomats that came up with the truce, which was allow the German army to march back into Germany without undefeated, so to speak, and just to stack arms. And it was a situation that Allied troops moved into Germany to take over the running of the government. In World War II, of course, we learned our lesson. Then we wanted unconditional surrender completely. We didn't want to leave any remnants of the German government in place. But here's another, I'm getting kind of.
No, keep going. No, it's great. No, it's great. Keep going.
Here's my second book, I'm working on the sequel to Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters. And in there is going to be a teaser that a correctly conjugated sentence determined back in the 1890s, determined who was going to be the winner of World War I. Huh? What? Okay. Well, it's kind of interesting. I think it was in the state of Missouri, as I recall. But young John Pershing was applying for West Point. He had no way of affording an expensive education. He wasn't particularly interested in the military, but of course, a free education at West Point was a hugely valuable prize. So he was competing for it. And he and another very bright young man tied, okay, in the examination, written examination. So to break the tie, they gave them, I think, more than one question. One of the questions was, how do you correctly conjugate this particular sentence? Young John Jay got it right. The other gentleman missed it, okay? So John Jay goes off to West Point, does very well at West Point, and becomes, beyond that, becomes an extremely outstanding officer, a very talented officer. He was actually promoted from captain all the way to general fairly early in his career. He served in the Philippines, had very good relationships with the people in the Philippines. It's a long story. Anyway, some historians believe that if it had not been for Pershing, I think Leonard Wood was kind of the second choice to be commanding of the expeditionary forces. If it had not been for Pershing, we might very well have lost World War I, and history would have gone a completely different direction. And that's a delight to English teachers everywhere. We'll be happy to hear that story. Because knowing how to conjugate a sentence made all the difference. And maybe we might have lost World War I except for the one mistake, or avoiding that one mistake.
That's terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying.
Yes.
Yeah, World War I is just, I don't know. You learn so much about World War II. I feel like World War I's glossed over, and the more you look into it, the more you realize just how insane that conflict was as well. Like,
yeah, huge casualties, and of course it was trench warfare. But you have to give. By the way, Pershing was not perfect. Patton was young Patton was one of his aides, and as he got into World War II, he would go to visit his old boss, and he said it was kind of sad that Pershing had not kept up with modern warfare, talking about air support and the tank support. He was still kind of locked into World War I thinking regarding the emphasis on the infantry. But nevertheless, he was extremely effective in getting the infantry in the Ardennes to defeat the Germans. Again, the German lines were collapsing as a result of the American offensive. You wouldn't ask the British or the French to say that necessarily, but it was actually true. By the way, Haig was in the second book I talked about this. Patton was saying that Montgomery was the only good general that the British had. There were bad generals, and Montgomery was more concerned about losing a battle than not winning one. Omar Bradley had a low opinion of the British generals that he worked with there in North Africa and Europe. Why is it that there's an old saying that the British army is composed of lions led by donkeys? And what do they mean by that? Troops in the field, the Tommies, as good as soldiers as there are in the world, strong, courage, very aggressive, very skilled, best in the world, equal to anybody's soldiers. But their generals just horrible. Okay, and that's true for a number of years, going back to War of 1812. Horrible generalship there in New Orleans. At one point, the generals had their troops stop in formation within range of the American infantry, American snipers. They were just shooting them down right and left. There were other mistakes that were made. Throughout the war. Haig was considered a disaster as a president. Ridgway, one of our very good generals, was just still years later, just exercised over what a horrible job he's doing and huge casualties that were taking place, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Why is it that the British generals were so poor? Well, the British system, to get a commission in the British military, you needed to be able to afford a lot of expensive uniforms. You needed to afford a lot of expensive parties and entertainment and so on and so forth. You needed an independent income to be able to become a commissioned officer in the British military, for the most exceptions. In the United States, it's just the opposite. Poor boys, and by the way, Bradley was coming from almost impoverished circumstances, one of our best generals. Eisenhower, very humble circumstances, and Pershing, his father was a shopkeeper and a farmer, one of 9 children. He could never afford to go to West Point or a fancy university. The free education at one of the best universities in the world, okay, was a big prize, and it reached deep into society and got people, Eisenhower's and Pershing's and Bradley's, from all strata society to be part of the pool from which leaders were chosen. The British system, I don't know, 60-70% of the people, 70%, whatever it was, or 80% was excluded. So they're drawing their officers from a very narrow pool, and the results have hurt them over the years.
I don't know if this is optimistic or pessimistic, this whole conversation. I have moments of hope and then moments of despair. It's a roller coaster. At some moments I'm like, we're gonna get through it, and the other moments I'm like, it's done. It's over tomorrow.
But it's good not to be a little bit, I guess, talking about United States history, whenever we're greatly involved, greatly revved up, and we make a major effort to deal with the situation, we are able to do it. World War I, World War II, the terrorist war on terrorism, and so on. The only time we have to, well, I shouldn't say the only time, but the main fear is if there's a lack of focused effort to be able to gear up to meet the challenge. That's, I think, our biggest thing to worry about. We can put together a strong military force the next 2 to 3, 4 years to intimidate China from trying to go to war. I think, I don't know for sure, I think, and also if we can deal also with what's happening in Latin America and the border, if we choose to do it and if we're focused in that direction. If we get lazy and sloppy and out of focus, and if our president is on the take from the Chinese Communist Party, that could be the internal rot that could cause big problems.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean that would kind of throw the wrench into all the gears, is if the commander in chief himself is compromised,
Or incompetent or senile. There's
or all of them. Yeah, it's
okay. And I got not pessimistic on us there, but I think the American people are aroused about the fentanyl crisis, and we are getting concerned about the threat from China. So hopefully, that's going to mean we're going to gear up and meet the challenge. We hope.
yeah. I mean, I think deterrence is the best choice. I don't really think there's any other viable option. I think you just have to have it such an overwhelmingly large force that just looking at it, you're like, it's suicide. I think that's the only, because we can't have total war in 2023. We can't have total war in the age of nuclear weapons. You can't have it. You have to have mutual assured destruction.
Yes. No, I think, and I say this with kind of a hope and a prayer, that the leaders on the other side are rational, and when they look at the way the cards are stacked up, hopefully against them, they would choose not to use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, which would, it's been communicated if they were to do that, that all of NATO and all of the United States would come into Ukraine and try to kill every possible Russian soldier, and also it'd sink every ship on the Black Sea. There'd be a huge retaliation, and supported by the nations of the world who would dare to cross that line. Hopefully that works. Of course, if you have someone who's dying of cancer, maybe he's off his nut. Hopefully not. If he is rational. On General Xi, I think, is cold, calculating, and rational. If he sees that he's going to take a beating or pay a heavy price until Taiwan, hopefully he would not also create a war there. But I don't know. Maybe thinks he can beat us and we can lose the war. So it's these are difficult, perilous times. I'm optimistic by nature. Hope it's not naive and optimistic. I hope it is going to work out for the means of a peaceful solution.
No, I'm with you. That's the critique I often get, is that I'm optimistic to a fault, but you kind of have to be, because just rationally, I mean, the very fact that we are still here says that it's worked out thus far. Doesn't mean that there hasn't been hundreds of millions of people killed in genocides over the millennia. Like, obviously it has, but by virtue of the fact that you and I are sitting here talking, we have gotten through it. And so that you don't even need to be optimistic. It's just it's manifested. It's provable reality. We're here. We're not in a on an irradiated ember. Like that's not an argument to say, well, you have to be optimistic. No, that's fact. We are here.
Beyond that article I just wrote in American Greatness magazine, I talked about how Eisenhower was not perfect, but he was able to avoid, technically speaking, not having a single casualty in his 8 years. Now, he inherited the Korean War, which was the responsibility of the Truman administration, but in his administration, part he was responsible for, not one single American soldier lost his life in combat. I think there was some exceptions actually to that. But anyway, the point is that it's possible, doing it just exactly right, to strike the right balance and to avoid the right kind of strength and peace through strength, and the right kind of balance to prevent war from taking place. But of course, the worst thing you could have is a tempting weakness on our part that invites the totalitarian regimes to attack us. So we need to be strong, especially in the Pacific, win in Ukraine, in my opinion, and have a very strong Navy in the Pacific. And hopefully that would discourage adventurism on the part of the Chinese.
I still think we need some orbital strike weapons, like rods from God, those tungsten poles. That you ever seen that concept?
No, of course,
Called,
there's a
it's
Space
called
Force is a whole big thing now. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, it's called rods from God, and it's
Okay.
kind of looks like this. It's like a platform in space, and it holds like 10 or 20 telephone pole sized tungsten rods, and you drop them from like 200 miles up, and they come down with like the force of a nuclear weapon, but no radiation,
Mm,
and pretty much impossible to stop and relatively cheap to manufacture. Got to get them up there.
mhm.
I don't know. I think that's a good deterrence, but that also might just escalate because how long until they build one and just hover it over New York, and it's like, well, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's the flaw in my own monkey brain is to think that we can just build a bigger weapon when all of human history is just one weapon leading to another defense. The guy that made the Gatling gun thought it would end war. No, it didn't. It just made it so much worse, right? I mean, the Maxim machine gun, like, no, it just jumped up a notch.
Yes, it's an arms race. Of course, there's the offensive side and the defensive side. The first hypersonic missiles right now we have no answer for. By
Yeah,
the way, our Patriot missile systems cannot stop them, and we're behind in developing. We're just in the early testing stages of hypersonic missiles. So we got a stolen march on us in that particular category. Fortunately, the Russians are just a sloppy mess when it comes to actually performing in the field. That's the good news. And hopefully we'll get some more good news. The Chinese have been untested. They've not really been in a war a long time. They did not, perform particularly well in Korea. Of course, they were not very well supplied. That's a whole other story. But we have a strong military, strong Navy, with a good chance of deterring the Chinese from further aggression. And that's just what we have to hope for. That's the basic pattern they need to take.
I hope it turns out well. But we're coming up on an hour, so I say let's wrap this one up. Mr. Knott, I'd love to have you back on. You're a cool guy. You're a cool guy to chat with. You are a wealth of knowledge. And when's the new book coming out?
Yes, at one point I was hoping I could have it out late this year. By the way, having a lot of fun writing the book.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a good sign. And my lady who does my editing and that sort of thing is very excited about the book. Also, she gave me positive feedback. It's going to be at least late this year. Maybe I can get it out in time for Christmas. If not, it'll be the first part of the following year. And I have two books. I have Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, #2. Okay, and then I also have another book on a different subject, the hushed up murders of famous people. They murdered big and got away with it. That's a whole different subject, but that's a fun book too. So it's I think that one of the reasons that I've been so blessed so far is that the books are fun to write and they're fun
Yeah.
to read and they're interesting. So
Yeah.
it's
No, the book it's a legitimately good listen on Audible. I wouldn't say that if I didn't mean it. Because I can't just recommend books to people because if people realize I just recommend every book of every guest, well, eventually my recommendation won't mean anything. So like I do mean it. It's a great book. It's a fun book. It's because the way it's sectioned out, it doesn't really feel like you're reading a book. It's just a bunch of like mini stories, and it's
Mhm.
great, and it's all true, and it is all kind of mind blowing. Like the weird dark force that seemed to just save Hitler time after time after time.
Amazing. It's
Like what
amazing.
is that? Like what is that? I mean,
You
but
know, subject quickly, the
there you
one
go.
that sticks in my mind the most is he came within 13 and a half minutes of being assassinated way back in 1939, the early beginning of World War II. Goering then would have taken over, who was kind of in favor of peace. World War II might have been avoided,
Yeah,
except that he left this big meeting at the big beer hall 13 and a half minutes sooner than expected. And the explosion took place and he missed it. So anyway, that's a whole great thing. But yes, Tiny Blunders, BigDisasters.com. Tiny Blunders, BigDisasters.com. We have a great website there, 2.5 free chapters. Also a book trailer there. And we have the portrait gallery that has 27 personalities with a little bit of dirt on each one. Not really, but anyway, it's kind of a fun part of the book there also.
Hell yeah. Well, guys, I would recommend it. It's legitimately a good read. It's fun, it's terrifying, and it's you can look at it in an optimistic or pessimistic sense. You know, the butterfly flapping its wings could destroy the world or could save the world. And it's, I don't know, there's some peace in that chaos, knowing that it's kind of out of your hands. There is some peace in that. Almost strange lovey and how I stopped worrying, right? But
and then too bad for sounding too religious here, but in Vietnam, I was out there in the infantry. It's the old saying: "There's not any atheists in foxholes." And I would just pray and pray and pray, and the God got us through.
yeah.
And all my men came back in one piece, and no one was injured, no one was killed. So maybe some power of prayer.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I pray every day. I think that's also an immense thing is, you know, if a dark force can protect Hitler, why can't a good force protect us, right? Well, because one implies the other. Up implies down, peace implies war, night implies day. So if you see evil, don't despair because that implies good.
Right. And then God has blessed us. He's blessed the United States enormously, and maybe at one point, it looked like 30, 40 years ago that maybe democracy was on the march, the Soviet Union was collapsing, et cetera, like that, Tiananmen Square, and that maybe the forces of democracy were going to be starting to prevail. It didn't happen. But maybe the future will be bright if we just keep heading in the right direction and ask God's support.
I think we will. And on that note, Mr. Knott, let's wrap this one up. Guys, links in the description. Go check them out. Look forward to your next book. And yeah, stay in touch, dude. I'd love to talk with you again.
Yes, absolutely. I loved it very much. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
You too. Thank you so much.